Hi and welcome to MyArtCube. Today we will be doing a brief demonstration of how to construct a drawing from basic shapes or forms. Now, I will walk you through step by step the process of seeing shapes and combining them to construct a few simple examples. It helps to visually deconstruct your subject into simple shapes and then draw those shapes, focusing on the proportions and positions in the composition. This way we can get accurate proportions prior to adding a lot of detail into the drawing. So we're going to keep it simple in the beginning. So let's go ahead and demonstrate this with a simple pear. Please note that my reference photo here is available as a link in the description of this video. Okay, so let's begin by seeing what shapes make up this pear. After a brief observation, clearly a pear can be represented by a few circles. So one here, and one very large circle here. Or you could technically represent this as forms as a cone, kind of an off-centered cone, and so sort of a skewed cone and a sphere on bottom. But we're going to go ahead and go with the example of two circles instead of using forms for this construction drawing. Okay, so to draw this, I'm going to start by positioning the spheres after measuring their relative sizes. So I'm going to draw a pear that's fairly similar in size to this. I'm going to start on the left-hand side of my page here and just start with the simple spheres that I described there and see how close we can get. Okay, and also you can measure. So we're going to measure, since we're using a photograph here, we can measure it directly on the photograph, the relative size difference. So there's about a 2-inch spacing here, so that's about a 2-inch circle. And this is approximately somewhere around 1.5 inches across for the circle. So I think this circle will be about 1.5 inches and a 2-inch circle down here in diameter. Okay, so we got some relative idea of how big these circles are going to be. So if we move the pear off to the side, still keep it mostly in frame here for you. We're going to start by making a big circle that's approximately 2 inches or a little over 2 inches in diameter. So I want it to fit into this parameter. So that's approximately 2 inches across. That's the center. So something like, and it doesn't have to be a perfect circle. And you'll see why. Okay, so we want a circle, or a circular shape rather. Now that's not quite circular, but we see that this pear does have a very circular edge here, so we need to get that edge kind of closer to a circle. So right about there. And it leans this way, so I'm going to go ahead and let that slope to the right, to the left rather. So sloping this way. So we've got kind of a wonky circle, but it's going to work in our favor because this pear is leaning to its left, and we notice that, and we want to take that into account. So actually my poorly drawn circle is going to help me sort of render this shape here. Okay, so we've got a poorly drawn circle. Have fun with it, don't be too serious. It's nothing too serious. So I'm going to outline that a little stronger, and don't worry about it being messy because this is just a construction drawing. This is just the beginning. And then we see there's a height to this pear. So you could make this pear half as big on your page or twice as large. You could make it smaller or larger, however you want to. Just make sure the proportions of the two circles you're making are similar. So 1.5 versus 2 units across. Okay, so up here So if I actually, you know what, let's go ahead and measure the distance of the height of this. So the height of this pear just to before the stem is, let's see, let me get that to the bottom there, is a little bit close to about 3 inches. So we'll make this about 3 inches tall. So say your second circle is going to have to happen up here, okay? And you can see how these two circles kind of can make up this pear. Do you see that? Okay, so we're using the height of the pear, the size of the pear, and the relative size of the bottom half of the pear and the top half of the pear. So we're using the widths to define this in space. And so basically what I want to do here is I want to create a curvature or a contour line around these two shapes. Now, so you can see the contour of this pear. It has a tapered edge here, so it slants in a little bit. See that inward slant? And it does the same thing down here. So what you do is when you're drawing a contour line that describes the outside of this pear, that's all a contour line is describing the shape of a form. And the outer contour line describes the outside outline of basically the outline of the object. Okay? So let's make that outer line. Okay, so it's going to spring up a little bit over here. And we can use little strokes. We don't have to use long strokes. We can use little strokes to define this. And I can see my angle right here is kind of vertical almost for a little bit. So I'm going almost vertical for a little bit. Then right about here, there's a sharp indent. Let's see if we can get this right. So if my height is here, my indent is right about there. So I need to make a sharp indent right here. So see how it's starting to define the shape of the pear? The indent might need to be a little bit lower than this, so we might go into that circle a little and then come out. So a little erasing, but first of all, let's just, before we really refine things too much and start fussing with it too much, let's just go ahead and draw a contour line. So let me just make this simple. Now I'm peeking up the top a little bit like this because it's not a perfect circle at the top of the pear. I'm coming over here. I'm drawing down. Okay. And then I'm going to go out a little bit. So out a little bit to meet the inclination of that pear. And then it has a fairly round bottom. I'm going to clean up this edge a little bit because I think this edge is a little too far out there. Okay. We don't want to fuss with it too much because this is just to get the contour line, right? We can refine the contour line and start erasing and adding and subtracting different things to make it a more accurate contour line as we go. So basically what we want to do is we want to block in the correct height. So if you want something this tall, you need to block in that height in the beginning and then make things appropriately proportional. But I wanted the height to be approximately what it is on the actual paper here or on the photograph. So this is approximately, if I can show you in the same frame, this is approximately the size of the photograph. Okay? And so we see that I've kind of manipulated the circle a little bit. I've started to change the edges on the circles to match up with the details in the actual contour line of this drawing, of this photograph rather. So if I follow this line, it kind of dents down, bumps out, and then curves back in. So we're just starting to adjust the pear. So we connected the two circles together with curving lines that replicate the curvature on this pear. Okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to start rendering this pear. So let's go ahead and add a stem. So we can see the stem is kind of facing us a little bit. It's on this side, so it's indented in. It's got a little circle right there, pokes up, and then breaks to the right. So right about here, there's a little area for it. It comes up at an angle to the left, just slightly to the left, and slightly to the left. Okay. So we're going to add in this stem, and it's only about that long, so I made it too long, but just a little bit. Okay. Then it's going to have a gap because it has a part that sort of curves over like this, and then it's got this part that breaks up and off. So I got a pear with a broken stem. And I did that on purpose because I thought it looked interesting. So let's see if we got the sizing right on this. Forgive me, I have a cold. So if I'm talking a little funny, it's just because I've got a cold. That's about 3/4 of an inch. This is fairly proportional to the photograph, so that should be about, well, let's see if I can measure it. Yeah, that's close to 3/4. Maybe a little longer. Maybe just a little bit longer on here. And so this stem is fairly sizable at the end. It thickens at the end here. And so you have this kind of a deal going on. And it's just connected by a little something there. And this needs to be probably a little tiny bit wider at the base here. Okay, so we're just starting to render. We just want to get the outline and positions of things as accurate as we can. And before we start adding in a bunch of details and erasing our circles. So before you add in the details, make sure you've got an accurate height, width, contour line, and any extra features that you need to add on before you start putting in shadows and shading and all of that. So that's just the take-home lesson, is start with the outline and start with the basic shapes and go from there. Okay, now there's also, this is not floating in space, this has a table behind it, approximately, let's see, where's my pear? Oh, my pear is pretty close to where it is on the paper. So right about there, there's a line that goes here and here. This is a table in the background. So I'll just put that there so it's not a floating pear. Okay. So now what we want to do is start rendering some shapes in here. Now we can tell there's a distinct little indent right here. So that's kind of a big feature of the pear, is it's sort of got an indent. It makes another sphere right there, and it's about, like, in length and width, there's one on the side, so this side is this length, right, and where I pinch my pencil, it goes two lengths on the other side. So yeah, we can divide this into thirds. So same here, if I take this length approximately, take it right there, yeah, and then 1, 2, yeah, so I've got the line approximately where I need it to be. So there's going to be shading features that define this little area here. Okay? I'm not going to say what it looks like. It's pretty obvious. It's a very cute little pear, but it's got this feature on it. We want to sort of describe that visually. I think it could go a little bit further left, so maybe a little more like this. So let's make that go a little further left. See if that describes it a little more accurately. So it doesn't have to be a perfect rendering. You're not going for photorealism necessarily when you're first learning. But you'd want to get it as accurate as you can, because, you know, that's the fun of it. It's like just seeing how close to the target you can get, right? So how close to real can we get? And it's the power of observation, good measurement methods, which I'm still working on clearly. So let's start erasing these circles a little bit. So there's the little guy so far. Now I've got a 2B and a 3B pencil for shading as well. And what I'll go in and do is start with the darkest areas in this case and just add a little shading around these areas, because as you can see from the photograph, it's quite shaded down on the left. The light source is clearly on the right hand side in the front of it. So we've got highlights all through here, but we've got darker shading on the left here, especially in this side. So I'm going to just start shading the pear sort of loosely with long strokes on this side where it's darkest. Sort of describe that. And it sort of tapers in and sort of ventures into this area here. And we see a little veining kind of up that way. Stark line there. So I'm going to push the value in the darkest areas. I'm just starting out because you can't layer as easily a 3B over a harder pencil. So once you put the harder pencil shading down, so right now I'm using a 3B, you can see 3B, that's a softer lead. If I use the HB for all of the shading right away, it will be harder to put this down later, because you cannot as easily put a 3B over an HB pencil. A softer lead does not go down and lay down easily over a harder lead. So just make note that you may want to start some of your darkest areas first and just gently shade them in. You don't have to go in really heavy with the shading in the beginning. You're going to build up some layers here. But I'm just going with the flow, the shape of the... So I'm not doing stark cross hatching or anything like that. I'm just going with the flow, going with the shape of the actual pear itself, and defining those shapes as I go along. And they don't have to be perfect, you know, you can leave strokes. You don't have to shade this with a blending stump if you don't want to. You can just shade it with just your own pencil stroke marks. So blending stumps are not required, but they help sometimes if you want really subtle blends. But I think having a sort of a sketchy looking pear is also a lot of fun, so we can do something like that this time, not use so much blending stumps. They're not required. The better you are at shading, the less you need the blending stump. So let's see what else. Over here where there's some darker areas at the very edge. So I'm going to get those in right away. But they're not too dark. So let's go back to an HB pencil and just sort of kind of shade this in with some strokes. Now there's some roundness and curvature here that you could kind of improvise with. So you could play with this curvature and go with the curve of the actual pear itself and shade it that way as well. And just sort of flare out that shading a little bit. Okay, so we're defining this little area here and just using strokes to define that. So this is going to come across, and you can kind of come across like this as well, just defining the shape of the actual lobe of the pear. So we can just sort of come across. It's not like it doesn't have a value gradient to it. It's not like you just put block in one area and say, okay, that's my darkest darks. You know, you want a gradient, right? So you're gonna add in more shading around those dark areas to sort of blend them in. And blending without the use of a blending stump is harder, but you know, it gets you more used to using the contours of the actual object itself as a guideline. So I think it helps to not always use the blending stump and to just sort of instead just use your own intuition, follow the curvature of the shapes or the square shapes or the curvature of the shapes depending on what kind of object you're working on, and go from there. Right? So we're starting to describe the value map of this pear. So you can kind of see it there. And it's kind of a little scrubbly thing, a little area here. So there's little markings on this pear that I want to describe that kind of bring out the character in it. And there's little areas that are darker than others, so I'll just kind of cross hatch those in. And then there's little stippling. So I'm going to add little, here, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more. Nope, that's about it. There's stippling that you can do. So that's just adding little dots, because the skin of the pear, you can see the skin of the pear has little dots in it and little patches of discoloration. So that's what gives it its character. I'm going to add some of these up in a sort of a random pattern in areas that they occur. And it adds a nice quality to the pear. So we're starting to get a description here of the pear itself. And so we want to keep going with this curving sort of trend, and I'm going to describe this side as well by just adding, now this is an HB pencil and I'm just doing long strokes of shading in the direction of the curve. So I'm going to come in here and go a little tougher next to the curve because it's a little darker on the edge of the pear. There's less light hitting it there. And then I'm going to go across the pear like this. And I'm going to go up and along this. So I don't have a real sharpened pencil for this. This pencil is just sort of, I'm using a more used side. And I'm just sort of flicking the pencil along to create that edge. Now, I want to describe some flaws on the pear. So I see some indents right over here that I want to describe, a little constellation of indents there. So, and then there's a little one right around here, a little bit like that. There's one down here. And these are just things that give character to the object you're working on, you know, help describe it visually and make it distinct from any other pear. Oh, sorry, there's a siren going by. Uh-oh. Okay. So we'll just keep shading as we go. And we'll shade the bottom part up into here. There's a couple of areas of discoloration in here that I want to describe, sort of splotchy areas. So I'll do some cross hatching for those. And another little patch up here. But otherwise, I'm just going to go ahead and give it that mottled look. And this kind of connects a little bit over here. Okay, so if we want to kind of get a broader edge to it, we can also go on the side of the pencil and just trace the outline of the pear, and that'll give it kind of a more defined edge. Okay, we can do the same thing on this side. I'm not as comfortable using my right hand for this because I'm left-handed, but you know what? Whatever works. Okay, so alright. So I'm going to add some more mottled look here. Now this needs a little more shading, so we need to push the values a little bit because this is not dark enough yet. So I'm going to use a little cross hatching here to describe this. But I'm going to leave that center area kind of unshaded to a point. So we're cross hatching now, so we're going the opposite direction, still going with the outline of the pear. And we're going to make those outside areas a lot darker. So it's all about building value. So as we build value, we build up the pear itself, right? So I know it looks like I'm losing my highlight right now. So we're kind of losing this highlight a little bit, but what we're going to do is we're going to come in with stronger shading on those outside areas to compensate for that. Because we want the whole pear to have shading in this case because it's not a really bright highlight. And so I'm gonna just do a little bit more of this. A little bit more of this. And now we're going to come in with a 3B pencil again and go back into those outer areas and really darken them up, because you can see it's really dark over here, like really dark, and really dark over here, and really dark in that crevice, and dark on that edge right there. Not quite as dark on these edges, but still. So these edges might be fine for value. I'll maybe just expand that out a little bit. Just expand that out just a little bit. And see, once the HB's down, the HB lead is down, it's harder to put down a layer of softer lead on top of it. So you just want to make note of that. It could leave kind of interesting patterns because the HB pencil was already there first. So we darkened up that side. Now let's darken up this side and really get those values pushed. So we're going to go in the same direction we went before. Really darken up that outline. And really start pushing the values. So I'm going to turn the paper see, we'll just go one stroke at a time. So I know this is supposed to be a brief demonstration, but shading is such a big deal. You know, you've got a coarse shadow, you got, in this case you don't have a lot of reflected light. You've got some light over here and some light here. So you've got down this angle and here you've got light, but otherwise you've got a lot of coarse shadow here on the left hand side of the pear. So let's just darken that up and give some actual value differentiation here. Stopped recording for a minute there. So this is kind of a dark example of a pear because I went all the way to 3B with the pencil leads, but I think it's pretty descriptive. I think it does an okay job of describing where the shadows are exactly in this, but this area should be even darker, I think. But what we can do is to lighten any area if we want to, just to exemplify, is you can kind of roll this around and lighten the areas that have the highlight. And this is just a kneaded eraser that I'm gently going over with, and I'm just dabbing out that highlight. And I can do the same thing down here. And there you have it, a rendered pear. We didn't do the stem actually, so I could go in with a 2B, or no, you know what, it's really dark. So let's go in with just a 3B real quick and render in this stem. It just needs a little color to it. Doesn't need a lot. And, or value rather, not color, because these aren't colored pencils, these are just graphite pencils. But just a little value, and so it darkens up quite a bit when we get to the broken stem. And it lightens up at the end there, so I'll preserve some light at the end. Otherwise I'll just fill that in for the most part. Yeah, that's fairly accurate. Okay. And we want this stem to not be see-through, so we'll just bring that down a little and then lighten it a tiny bit. Okay, so how was that for you? Did that work for you? Did that help? I hope it did. We also have a shadow here that we could do real quick. And that's going to be done with just an HB pencil, and I'm just going to quickly outline this shadow that you see. So this shadow kind of tapers off like that. So this shadow kind of does one of these, kind of out and then in and then back. It's kind of hard to tell. It's a very fuzzy shadow, so let's go very fuzzy on the edges here. Very fuzzy shadow. It's on an uneven surface, so just put a shadow in there. And sort of just come over like that. So that's the shadow. So we've got a highlight. This is the highlight. This is the highlight here. And actually the highlight shouldn't be that far down on this base area, so we should probably fill this in a little more here. There, that's better. Now you can see the highlight is more accurate. And we can still fill in some of this here. Never quite done. Never quite done. But you get the idea, the general idea. And you notice we didn't use any blending stumps for this. So we could have blended this out slightly, but I chose not to just because I wanted it to be a rendered piece that has the appearance of, you know, just kind of a sketchy appearance with the actual lines that represent the shading and cross hatching in there. So this is the pear. I'll have a PDF of this pear and maybe also a lemon drawing demonstration, but that will be just for reference. So this is the pear. It looks kind of hairy almost, and that's because we got a lot of lines in there and a lot of dark lines. But we could have done this just in HB if you want to. So if you want to just do this pear in HB, that's totally legitimate. You know, you can just darken the darkest area by going over it a lot with an HB pencil. But otherwise, yeah. Okay, I hope that was useful. See you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you found any part of this demonstration informative. Alright, see you next time, guys. Bye.